Yeah, it was summer of 2018, actually.
Okay, 2 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, we were shooting mid-July, I think. Mid-July of
Okay.
summer 2018.
Yes,
Yeah.
weather was always changing like the summer does, and it was a beautiful piece that they filmed in Georgia, in upstate Georgia, and I thought, I don't know if we ever really had a kind of a talk about nuts and bolts about how it all came about. So I thought, since we have this program, and this is really the focus of this program, is not sometimes to talk about the equipment, but also talk about the actual filmmaking of film here in Georgia. I thought we'd invite Siddharth and Daniel to talk about their project. So with that, if I can just ask each of the participants, Siddharth and Daniel, just give a quick bio, and then we'll go into the actual making of Andrew's letter. So Siddharth, you were the director and screenwriter. So if
Yes.
I can ask, just give a little background about yourself, and then I'll do the same thing to Daniel.
Sure thing. I'm Sidarth Kantamneni. I'm originally from Alabama, but I have been in Georgia since coming to Georgia Tech in 2006, and the plan was always to finish my studies at Georgia Tech and then move on to New York or California. And the industry, I think, as most of you know, if you're all in Atlanta, sort of moved here. So there was really no reason to leave. There was plenty of film work to go around. In college, I was working on short films and with student groups and at Georgia Tech, and also other independent filmmakers around Atlanta that I was meeting. I tended towards the camera department. I've always been a photographer. Mostly, always had a stills camera in my hand since I was a little kid. So I started working. I just kind of naturally became the cinematographer in my group of colleagues in student films and independent films. Was hanging around the rental houses here in town. Started to get to know more professional camera people. That's kind of how I got my first steps into the camera department as a utility second assistant. Started working in independent stuff as a DP. And when I say independent stuff, I mean, two people hanging out the back of a car, sort of independent stuff.
That's pretty independent.
So yeah, while I was doing that and shooting music videos, short films, that sort of thing with friends, was also trying to kind of work up as a utility second AC on slightly larger but still really tiny projects. But to make a long story short, I've been working in the camera department for about 10 years now in Georgia. I'm now a union camera operator. That's the day job. I work as a union camera operator on film and television. I work as a second unit DP and DP on sort of smaller projects from there. And I've also started kind of jumping into directing in the last 2 years. So I've been writing and directing some of my own stuff, and also started directing a few episodes of a TV show that I work as an operator and then a DP on. And that's actually something that Dan worked on the same show and took it well beyond anything that I've ever shot. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. Local DP turn DP director.
Well, great. Thank you, Siddharth. And Daniel?
It's not too much different. I'm from New York originally, Long Island, and I was trying to kind of find a good fit for film school. So it kind of led me to Rockport College in Maine. They do Rockport workshops. I'm pretty sure they still do their workshops, but the workshops are what's kind of somewhat famous there.
Yes.
And they had a great associates program. I don't know if they still do, but they had an associates program that I went to. And it was, thinking back on it, was really great. Got to shoot a ton of film. That was like when you were just hearing whispers of HD. So it was a great experience. And then I wanted to finish up my education because I didn't really have a great opportunity to kind of start my career out. So that took me to Savannah College of Art and Design, where I kind of finished up, ended up getting a master's, just, shooting more and more. That's when HD was still coming about. They used to have a film lab actually on site there.
Yes, I remember that.
And I was fortunate enough to have about, I think, 2 years I was able to use that. And then, fortunately they closed and, whatnot. But that's when HD, the red one had just come out, and HD was still kind of, in that new territory. So it was an interesting time. And then similar to Siddharth, you had to kind of figure out, how to get into the camera department. That was kind of where I always shot, so it seemed like a more natural fit to start in camera department. So I started out as utility second, and then, very similar to Sid. Sid's been a great role model over the years, but, just shooting stuff on the side, commercials. It was a lot of commercials for me at first, and that gained momentum to the point where I could stop camera assisting, and then, pretty much kind of start shooting full time on smaller things, and, kind of working your way up through bigger projects. And then, occasionally operate when you can, just to fill in the gaps. And yeah, it's pretty much where we're at.
And you both still make your home in Atlanta, so
Yeah.
Yes.
it's like we know how sometimes things fluctuate. So, okay, Andrew's letter. Andrew's letter was written by Siddharth, and it's a period piece. 1940s, World War II era, home front. I enjoyed the story. I particularly like that type of era. And I just, Siddharth, I look at you as, and most of everybody on this as being very young. So I was like, wow, you're choosing to write a story of a particular period of time that you weren't around at that time. So one is, how did the story all come about?
Yeah, Andrew's letter, just a sort of a brief description. It's 1940s home front, West Virginia, like you said, during World War II, and it's a short film. It runs about 13 minutes, and it's just a short episode in which a young woman living out in the countryside sort of gets the worst news she can. Her son has died in the war overseas, and in this moment of sadness, she doesn't really have time to cope with it or to grieve fully, because she immediately is drawn into having to be the one to sort of like de-escalate a situation between the officers that have arrived to give her the news and several of the people in her community that are there working on the farm. There's a communication breakdown that happens, and tensions are high in this very emotional moment. And something that I think happens a lot happens, which is where the lone woman at the center of this event has to kind of take on all of the emotional burden of everyone around her. And in this case, it's incredibly unfair, because given the circumstances, she should be the person being taken care of at this moment, but she has to manage and keep the peace and take care of everyone else. And you're right, I'm 30 years old. I am nowhere near old enough to remember anything about World War II by several decades. But I wrote the piece in, I said we shot in 2018. I wrote it, or had the first ideas of it, in 2016, when I was sort of convalescing in Alabama after surgery, and I was back home in Alabama at my parents' house, and it was sort of the full swing of the 2016 election cycle. And something about where I'm from in Alabama, I think we had the largest Trump rally in the nation at the time, just down the street from where I grew up. And I was, I think you can tell in the video, I'm of Indian descent. I was born and raised in Decatur, Alabama, but don't look a lot like the people I was raised around. But I'm still very much a small town guy from Alabama, and I started to see kind of over and over again just the dissonance between the conversations that one has with the people in their immediate community versus the way the conversations are being depicted and polarized in the media. And obviously, even more so now. At the time, it was an incredibly polarized election. So I really wanted to make a movie that spoke to sort of like the situation of people finding themselves on opposite political or cultural or social ends of the spectrum, but still being the members of a singular community, and sort of having to cope with the fact that, like, you can be on different sides of things. You can think that you are very fully, literally wearing the uniform of your side, as it were, and still having to realize that, like, at the end of the day, you're surrounded by a group of people that are the people that you in your immediate vicinity are, who you have to learn to empathize with, who you have to learn to take care of, who you have to be able to communicate with on a human level and connect with. So that's sort of where the immediate script came from. And I put it in this World War II setting because, I mean, one thing, aesthetically, it was an interesting sort of visual language we wanted to deal with. And also, I wanted to talk about things that were very immediate and maybe a little bit tougher to talk about in sort of a more, maybe slightly removed and easily digested sort of way, so as to not immediately drive one group of people away from the get-go, placing it into something that I think, like, in general, as an audience, American audience, we can all say, like, we understand World War II. We understand who's the good guys, who's the bad guys,
Right.
generally what's going on. So that's a little bit about comforting the audience. It's also a little bit about drawing them in and subverting that idea.
Okay.
So,
yeah, I was going to ask you that because I was curious. Why did you have the setting of World War II versus, say, Afghanistan, Iraq? But you just answered that, so that's very interesting. Why you chose that era, and I agree.
Yeah,
That's very interesting. How you placed it that time, because everybody could relate to it, and it's almost neutral.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I think we think that that's an incredibly neutral, one-sided. There was the good guys, there were the bad guys, we were the good guys, we won. And I think, especially now, something that we're seeing right now, if you turn on the news and if you're paying attention to what's going on in the country, at no point in American history has there been a clear-cut good guys, bad guys. This was a better time than this. I mean, that's just not the case. So I wanted to play with that era a little bit.
Okay. Well, thank you. Now, so that was, you filmed in 2018. You wrote this in 2017 when you were home. So
yeah, 2016, 2017. I think I had the idea sometime in 2016 and finally took random notes and put pen to paper in 2017.
Okay. So you finished writing it, which actually, I'm not sure. Are you planning on this is a springboard for a feature, or this was, okay, this is a short and I don't intend to go any further than this?
Yeah, this one came about really just as a short. Honestly, okay. I've always been writing. I've always kind of been keeping notes and mulling over ideas and things to work on. But the idea to make a short, and specifically a short on film, actually came from Daniel. One day, I had been working on a TV show as a cinematographer. After a few episodes, or I think after the end of a season, I had moved on to a different set of shows. And Daniel, who had been working on those, took over as cinematographer. And then he, like I said, took that show and worked on way more episodes than I ever did. And one day we were having a drink, or we were having coffee one day, and he told me, this is all great. We're both doing good work. We're both at a place where we're enjoying, like, we're working as cinematographers, but, like, what are the kind of things we want to do? And one of the things that Daniel brought up was just really wanting to get a project on film because, like he said, he'd been shooting film. He had the opportunity to do a lot of film in in school, I have never shot motion picture film. I shot stills film all my life, medium format, 35 millimeter, even some large format, but never motion picture film. So Daniel basically was like, I want to put a project on 35 this year. You direct it, I'll shoot it. Let's figure something out. So we kind of started racking our brains on what the right project for that would be.
Okay, so Daniel, Siddharth writes this story, Andrew's letter, the script, and then presents it to you as with the intent to be the cinematographer. Your impression?
Oh, I mean, I was thrilled. I've known Sid for years, so like we kind of always kind of come into each other's zone and talk about how things are going and kind of check in with each other. And you always hope that a friend of yours comes to you with a project, because generally speaking, you know, a lot of times you're on projects with people you don't know, and you know, you got to kind of get to know people during the project. So I was just like super thrilled when he said he had a script, and I was just like, well, I hope we do this. You know, I was on board immediately. I love Sid's aesthetic and Sid's work, and have a lot of respect for him. And I think we come from somewhat of a similar place where we really appreciate, I guess you would call them older movies now, but more classic style films. When I was young, all my parents did, and I guess it's unusual now that I think about it. When I was young, we didn't really watch things past the 1960s for whatever reason. My parents were just kind of stuck in this time where we watched so many old films and classic films, and that's where I kind of got a love for movie making. And I love modern things as well, but you know, sometimes when you're initially fall in love with, you know, a kind of form, and it's a certain you know, classical style, you might gravitate more towards people who also kind of appreciate that style, because you know, it's not, people don't necessarily, there's so much innovation in cinematography now, which is amazing, so you don't maybe quite as often hear about movies that were made, you know, in the 60s or earlier nowadays, maybe not quite as much. So you know, yeah, I mean, it was like music to my ears. The script was amazing, but also, you know, set in the context of the time period, and it, you know, lend itself perfectly to shooting film. You couldn't have really asked for, you know, sometimes, you know, and everybody will come into contact with this, but you know, sometimes people kind of just want to shoot film just for the experience, which is amazing. But this script actually seemed like it needed to be shot on film in order for you to buy the time period and all that kind of stuff. So it was, I mean, you don't often kind of have those perfect projects fall in your lap like that. And this was just, you know, it was awesome.
Great. Actually, two questions for you, Daniel. So then, Siddharth shows you the script. You see that. I guess the first question, with your upbringing of watching classic films, did you, with that library of memory of classic films, did you apply any of those classic films with the look of Andrew's letter? And this second question is, okay, basically you're both on board. What was the timeline between you're both on board to, okay, we got to get the crew and we're going to shoot this? So I guess my first question to you, Daniel, is the look. Was it influenced by your library of films?
I think, I mean, you always kind of influence things a little bit, but I mean, Sid has an amazing aesthetic that he comes with, and he knew, you know, he had a vision for the aesthetic as well. And as soon as we started talking about, you know, some of the earlier things where we were talking about, we were talking about, you know, shooting at a deeper f-stop, shooting at 35, shooting it in a certain aspect ratio. Those were all just kind of things that, you know, when I was listening to him, it just made total sense, because those were things you saw in those kind of style of films. And then there were storyboards that Sid had early on, and then you're kind of you know, part of the role as the DP is then, you know, you're kind of listening to what, you know, the director is, you know, wants, and then it's like kind of a logistical you know, not problem, but it's then more of a logistical job of figuring out, you know, where are we going to shoot this? Then that will that will dictate how we can light it, how we can block it,
Right.
and then kind of make everything come to light. So it's, as much as I'd like to say, yeah, like we immediately came up with all these things, it's more of like, the director has their vision, and then you're kind of having to make adjustments in order to get it kind of as close as you can to the vision. And that's kind of your job. It's almost like you're responding then to things that are you don't know yet. Once we, I think, first talked about the script, we didn't have a location at first. And funny enough, maybe this is kind of more to your second question, is, like, of course, I think we both could see it perfectly in our minds based on the script and based on, it wasn't that even long the script. So some of the things just totally stood out. But then it was a matter of finding this location. And initially, we were going to shoot at a totally different location because it was a tricky one to find, and we scouted it, and it would have required a lot of different work on logistical work because there kind of wasn't trees. It would have been a lot of hard light. There was just a lot of kind of moving pieces that, with the kind of crew size we had and some of the real logistics, might have been more difficult. And then eventually, Sid found this other location, which was like a dream location. I mean, just totally perfect. And then that dictated kind of, we were able to take some meter readings, figure out what we needed, because, we knew the stock was daylight, 50 ASA, so it was a little slower off the bat. So then with that and the amount of, logistical resources we had, we were able to kind of figure out things. But, I think early on, having it on a dolly, having it, I think we talked about having it on the wheels, fluid head, it was more of a static. We talked about zooms. I mean, all these things, they just get me excited. But, all those things kind of led into the film. And then, once we shot it, then when the color grade came up, we talked about, color grading it more like maybe a 3-strip print process a little bit, more of an aged film. And then that conversation goes to the colorist, and then they interpret that in their way. And then we watch it, and we both, give notes. So it was a very collaborative process, and this was a great one for me because, Sid is a cinematographer himself. So it was more than about, once we started kicking off the, production of it, letting Sid be able to work with the actors, and, because these performances, if they didn't play, it wouldn't really work. And then taking on the job and more logistical responsibilities. And then if it came into a moment of compromise, giving suggestions about how we could possibly do this, because for whatever reason, we can't do, what we had initially planned. So it was a great process. And then right after that, we went into shooting a TV show together. He was directing it. So it kind of just snowballed right into another project, which was great. It was a little while before, in the planning process of us agreeing to it, to shooting it, because we had actually been very close to locking in on that one location, I believe. Very close.
The other location, or the one that you wound up shooting?
The old location, okay. Yeah.
Now, when you talk about lighting,
we locked in. We had a shoot date. Oh, sorry. No, I was just saying that what Dan's talking about is we actually had fully cast. We were in rehearsals, and we locked in a shoot date at a beautiful location out in North Georgia. But like he said, the final film ended up in this lovely little farmhouse, kind of like in a valley, surrounded by like just the right amount of beautiful tree cover for like nice dappledge in the front yard. The original location was also a gorgeous farmhouse, but it was in a completely treeless valley that would just have been 100% hard light all day long. But we were locked into it, and Dan had worked out an entire shooting scheme of like basically editing in the way we were shooting, knowing that like we always kept the characters in a certain sunlight, so we were going to have to block shoot whole sides of the scene and then flip over and break up the conversations. It was this whole sort of Rubik's cube of scheduling that he'd set up. And then in the last minute, the location owners decided they were going to up the price a lot, and it was out of our budget. All of a sudden, it was just a series of conversations that didn't go well. and we ended up having to just punt the shoot. Call our actors, call our crew, say we're still 100% doing this, but we just lost our farmhouse, and the whole movie takes place at the farmhouse. But we immediately, 2 weeks later, we found the right place. We got it back on track, and it ended up, like Daniel said, like it was a completely different location. It was way better for our light. I think just aesthetically overall, it was way better. And it ended up being more of a blessing that we were there.
Yeah,
that's good. Actually, that's a great lesson to those who are on the call, that sometimes the best laid plans, you all of a sudden get something throw up, and you have to go to plan B. So you accepted that, and you didn't panic. And well, I'm sure you probably panicked, but you went to plan B.
We panicked a little bit.
Now, when you watch it, to me, when you watch the film, and I know it's Sidarth and Daniel, but there's a big crew behind you for a short film. How did you assemble this crew? Did you do it by friends of friends, or did you advertise? When I say crew, one being the people behind the camera, and then two, the people in front of the camera. So how did you assemble this ensemble and say, okay, we're gonna film, say, in 2 weeks? And I think we probably lost on that one.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, is he back?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hear me?
Yes. Oh, well, you're kind of going in and out. So if you're there, Daniel, you may know a little bit.
Yeah. Well, as far as the crew goes, I know Sid will chime in, I'm sure, about, the cast and the production, but it always helps, having been in the industry for a while here and having worked with a lot of people. So having connections in that regard for people, but having connections in that regard for people who you work with, can make it a little easier, but.
Okay. Siddharth is back. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey. Yeah. Sorry. This is what happens when you're driving on Zoom.
That's okay.
But yeah, no. I mean, I think from the moment we really decided to make this thing, it was probably a 3-month process of pre-production. We started with the core group. Obviously, it was Daniel and I, and then we brought on my producing partner, Michael Corrigan, and another partner of ours, Billy Tizano, who was another producer that I'd worked with. And I think, Dan, you might have worked with him a little bit on some of the IU stuff. So this was a group of people that we've been, my co-producer, Mike Corrigan, he and I have known each other since college and have been working on independent films since then. And we immediately started trying to figure out who we wanted on this project. For technical crew, it's really easy when you have a cinematographer like Dan, because that's somebody that we know has kind of like their working crew that they work with on project to project to project. Not 100% the same people all the time, but you develop these professional relationships and start carrying a lot of the same faces, or at least a rotation of the same faces. So in terms of technical crew, it was easy for me because I just said, hey, Dan, I want you to shoot this. You bring anybody you want to bring. Like if they're good enough for Dan, they're good enough for me, is sort of my thing with any of the G&E crew or the camera crew. Art department, costumes, that was something where we really sort of, I don't think we ever really advertised, like there was no cold calling, no like looking for anybody we didn't know. Luckily, between the work that I do and the work that my producing partner Mike Corrigan does, he's in the same way that my day job is I'm a camera operator and DP and I'm a director and producer on this project. His day job is he's a union art department set dresser. So
go ahead, Daniel.
It's really easy for him to source a lot of people that he works
he's
with.
Back.
Much. Oh, where did I drop out, guys? Or
No, you're
Well,
back.
Set director.
Okay.
You're good.
Okay, cool. Sure. Did I drop out there for any part of that?
You
Just
started
first.
saying about the set director and
Oh, okay. Yeah, but we got our art department. We got a great art department because through our producer Mike, who I think at the time had just finished or maybe was even in the middle of working on the newest Avengers Endgame at the time. Basically called a bunch of his friends and was like, "Hey, we're working on this short film. Come and play." And it's a nice thing to be in a city like Atlanta where there's so many people in the independent film community that sort of are also working technical crew, below the line crew on some of these kind of massive projects that are going on in town, and are excited to have the opportunity to work on smaller projects, but in positions where they get to have a little bit more creative control. And that's kind of where we were across the board. Our art department, we had, I think when we looked at our crew, we had art department from some of the Avengers movies. We had some camera people that were at the time like working on the camera crew, or at least the second unit camera crew of Ozark and Walking
Wow.
Dead.
Wow.
I think our costumers were on Stargirl at the time. Like it's a pretty great environment in that
Good
sense
experience.
from a crew standpoint in Atlanta to be able to pull these people with all of this sort of major league experience to come to your short film and say everybody to bump up a rung in your department and get a little bit more creative control on this smaller gig.
Okay, great.
And that's behind the camera. In front of the camera, we actually went the complete opposite direction, where we didn't really know anybody in the cast until we put out a casting call for this. And luckily, my current driver, my
You're doing a great
girlfriend,
job
Hannah
there.
Rose, is an actress here in town, and there wasn't, unfortunately, there wasn't really a role for her in this piece, just given the character descriptions that we had in the piece. But she was able to serve as our casting director, and she did an excellent job of reaching out to people within her community, being an actress in town, and then also casting a pretty wide net that went all up and down the East Coast in order to find the cast that we got. We ended up with a cast of I think half Atlanta actors, and then we had an actor from Birmingham, actually. Virginia Newcomb, our lead, was from Birmingham. Our Mary, Kernisha Steele, came up from New Orleans, and the farm foreman, Lawrence, he came down from Baltimore. And I think that's it. I think that's it for people traveling. But yeah, I mean, so the crew side was kind of a home team, sort of small town connections, and then the cast side was really our casting director, Hannah Rose Broom, casting a very large net to find the right people.
Now this being a short film, and obviously people will have their day jobs or during the week. So you filmed this on a weekend. Was it 2 weekends, 1 weekend, or was it planned for 1 weekend? And I think you got rain, so you had to go 2 weekends. Or how many days did actual production take?
Yeah, it was initially planned for 1 weekend, a Saturday and a Sunday, and we got pretty much everything that we shot our schedule out in Saturday and Sunday. We got everything that we were planning on getting. Once we got into editing, we kind of realized this movie is 90% of what we want it to be. We had a picture lock, or what we thought was going to be a picture lock, and we were like, this thing is 90% there. If we had, these 2 shots, if we had this one reaction shot from Michael over to Rebecca, that sort of thing, we had a shot list of, I think, only 4 or 5 shots that we decided, if we got those, this movie would be 100% where we wanted it. So we ended up adding on 1 extra shooting day, I think about a month, 3 weeks to a month after the principal photography. So 2 full, 12-hour days, followed by 1, I think, 6-hour day, something like that.
Okay. Well, I know we are at 9:50 right now, so
Oh yeah.
all the questions, and I just don't, if anyone who's on this call, if they want to ask a question, I don't want to take away from those who would like to ask a question right now, but if not, I was going to ask you, obviously, you shot this on 35 millimeter film, motion picture film. And I'll just give a plug. We processed it and scanned it here at Kodak Atlanta. But why film? What drove you to say, I want to capture this story of moving images on celluloid?
Well, I think outside of Dan
He's
and I just really
speechless.
wanted to get on the film again.
Oh, he's back. He's coming.
Story-wise, did I pass out again there? Story-wise, it just felt like, again, playing with this more classical style, playing with this more classical subject matter. Okay. Playing with the era, World War II, the more classical shooting style that we wanted to do. Aesthetically, it felt like film was the right way to go in terms of, everything else is antique in this. And I'm not saying that film is only used for antique things, but it just felt like the texture that film could provide would go very much along with everything else we've been seeing in terms of like these memories of these World War II era films, not just the films, but a lot of the imagery that was kind of like inspirational for me when starting the conversation with Daniel was a lot of medium format photography, a lot of documentary photography, some of Gordon Parks' work in Alabama in the civil rights era and slightly before that. Walker Evans, sort of like, I can't remember, the workers photography around America, like farm workers of America.
Right.
That's sort of Dorothea Lange's, the famous Depression mother photograph, that kind of thing.
Right.
All we just started realizing that all of our references were these filmic references. So if that's the story, if those are the inspiring images for us, why wouldn't we do the most, directly related to that medium, which is 35 millimeter film? And then we started making choices about the aspect ratio, again, going back to that older studio style, but also, like I said, a lot of what we were looking at was medium format. A lot of what I'm familiar with shooting in my personal life is medium format, so that more square 4:3 frame felt very natural to the piece. And also there were some thematic reasons why a more vertical frame than the typical sort of widescreen 235 would be correct for us. And then one thing that Daniel mentioned, we shot at a very low ASA. We shot on the Vision 3 50D stock. And we did that because we knew about the highlight range of that stock. We knew about not just the highlights, the entire dynamic range, but specifically the room we would have in the highlights for a stock like that. Knowing that we weren't going to have a massive budget or a massive schedule for, having a ton of light fixtures and a ton of time to set up lights and grip, we wanted something that could give us the absolute most versatility we could use. And on top of just like the timing, we also had a cast that has a full range of skin tones out in direct sunlight. So we knew that we wanted to have as much dynamic range as we could so that we could expose for the character with the darkest complexion that we had and the character with the lightest complexion, which, in this case, we had a scene between a very dark complexioned African-American man and a very light-skinned, red-headed guy with freckles. And we had the two of them standing in direct sunlight, faces squaring off against each other. And we knew that without a lot of grip and lighting help, that was going to be very tough on digital. Whereas with that 50D that we knew we had, something like 8 stops in the highlight latitude, we could expose for the darkest complexion on screen and hold our lightest complexion cast members and all of the information in the bright summer sky that we had. And that was something that we just wouldn't have stood a chance with shooting digital without a lot more time and a lot more budget.
Okay. And then Daniel being the cinematographer, I wanted to ask you about, obviously you used film on this 35. You had mentioned, Siddharth mentioned that you were very, you had everything storyboard, you had everything blocked off, you knew exactly what you wanted. Is that because you chose film? Or is that because you were shooting film and film going through the gate is money, or that's the way you work? Would it have been different with digital?
Well, Sid's also a great artist in general. So I think the way he kind of saw, he would show sketches of certain ideas of blocking and everything. I think that's just kind of more, how he works, and then obviously, and it also is a great communication tool for somebody who's shooting it, for him to say, "Look, this is what I'm thinking for the framing and stuff like that," and then once you get to your location, there's variations you have to make based on the theme. Every location isn't perfect in every way, but so then once we got to the location scout, we were able to alter it. But obviously, we were somewhat conscious of the fact that we were shooting film. I think just in terms of we didn't have an infinite amount of film. But I think in this was a perfect project for film because Sid knew what he wanted out of each shot, and we weren't trying to kind of find, we weren't trying to just do normal coverage. So that was just, but I think that was just, that was more, I think, Sid's understanding the project and how he kind of saw it perfectly in his head. That speaks more to the fact that, of course we were conscious of shooting film, but it didn't feel like it was limiting in any way in terms of, having to be too prepared for it. So, but yeah, no, it was a perfect project for it. It really was.
Okay. Yeah, I think we kind of lost Siddharth.
No, I'm right here.
You're right there. Okay. But I want my next question is regarding the post-production. Okay, so you filmed it, we processed it, we scanned it. Talk a little bit about that post-production process, how long that took, as far as you said you had in 3 months you had to go back for a edit shot. How long did it take between when you finished, between you had picture lock? And the other thing I just want to talk quickly about is you have very good music to this short film. And was that done ahead of time? Did you know who you had as far as for the music, or would that came in later? So the first question is, how long did it take you in post before picture lock, and how did that process go?
Well, in post, like you said, Kodak, you guys developed and scanned everything for us. So that was fantastic to get that overnight. Like Dan mentioned, we immediately, that weekend, we shot the short film. And then I think on Monday, we went right into shooting an episode of television with most of the same crew. And so it was nice to be able to get the hard drives and start getting still frames from Andrew's letter while we were on set, the next day, or I think on Tuesday morning. But in terms of post-production, we got a picture lock from what we had shot in our principal photography. I think within 8 days, 10 days, our editor, Addison Miller, worked very quickly on that. Addison Miller, who's actually one of the leads in the short, one of the actors in the short, is also our editor on the piece. So once he got that, and we saw those, couple pieces that we knew we needed to add back in, like I said, I think it wasn't actually 3 months, it was 3 weeks that we were able to schedule our pickups and shoot that last day of additional photography. After that, because it was really just a matter of plugging in very specific spots, it took no time at all. I think we had the picture lock by the end of the week. So maybe in total about a month.
Wow.
A month and a week, I think, to get picture lock. In terms of the score, we had a local Atlanta composer, Evan Hodges, who I had met and had been looking for a project to collaborate on for about a year. We met randomly in a coffee shop. I saw this guy writing out a musical score by hand, sitting in a coffee shop, and I said, "Okay, I want to see what this guy's about." And he told me he was a film composer, and we started a conversation. And so when Andrew's letter came up, I was like, "Okay, I want this to have a again, kind of a classical style that fit the aesthetic of the film. So Evan was the first person I called, and he had the script, and we had several conversations about the mood that we were going for before we started shooting the movie. So he had already kind of done some rough sketches in terms of like general themes that he was wanting to play with. And then once we were able to give him he was getting scenes, if not the whole movie, throughout the editing process, and he was able to sort of like start roughing in what he was feeling, kind of modifying the themes that he'd been working with for about a month already to fit the actual scenes. So then when we got picture lock, it was, I don't know, I think another 3 weeks of him tinkering around, creating sort of a rough digital score to put alongside the picture lock until we could refine that. And once he had a score of his sort of digital version of the music alongside the movie, and then we'd locked that, Evan actually collected a group of professional and orchestral musicians around Atlanta to play a live recorded version on cello, piano, and violin of the score itself. Oh. So we have an analog score and an analog visual.
That's great. That's great. Okay, picture lock. How did you? Obviously, I've seen you went to some local film festivals, but how did you direct where to send the film to have an audience?
So the local film festivals that we were in, like Cherokee County is where we shot. So they had their film festival up there, so they were very excited to invite a locally shot film in. And then the choices that we made were based really, setting up sort of a tiered system of like what were the film festivals that we wanted to see our picture in, where we thought kind of like was the right audience for it. So we, over the course of several months, sort of set up like in the same way one might set up their college applications, their reach schools, right, and their the more realistic goals and their safety nets. And so we sent out to a pretty wide variety of festivals, just kind of based on that. And then actually pretty soon into the initial festival run, one of the festivals that we'd sent the film to, the international short film market in Clermont-Ferrand in France, which is one of the biggest short film we actually were approached by a French distributor who would be playing in the marketplace there, and we did her to pick up the movie and try to distribute it for a Western European market. So once that happened, we kind of shifted our focus more to the distribution side of things.
Great. I'll ask one more question, and then let anyone else who'd like to ask a question. But project finished. You locked it. You distributed it. Any lessons learned from making this? If you want to share with the people who are on this online call.
Well, I think something that Dan was talking about, and you mentioned with the storyboards, like this was definitely the most planned out project, and a lot of that was because we were shooting on film. We had a very specific idea of what we wanted, but also we knew we were going to have limited time, smaller budget, shooting on film. So we really planned this project out to a T, which, sometimes in indie films, that's not the case. And it's because you want things to feel more organic. You want things to have a life to them. This project, we storyboarded every frame. We had months of planning. We had more rehearsal than I've ever had with my cast. And that really was, I'll never do a project without that much planning again.
Good advice. Good experience.
It made everything go smoothly in a way that we were also able to still keep things lively, still keep things organic on set, and improvise knowing that we had a plan we were following. So even if we decided to stray from it a little bit, we weren't going to kind of lose our way. So the amount of planning and
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Daniel, because I think Siddharth is
main aspect of the project,
there.
that's the way we're going to go. I lost you again. Yeah, we're entering some slightly stormy.
No, we got that. We got the gist of that. I'll ask the same question to Daniel. Any lessons learned?
I mean, I feel like I always learn a million lessons after every project, and I always try to write them down right after to try to learn from it. But yeah, I mean, you know, it had obviously been a while since I shot film, so you know, I think you always have to trust your meter a little bit more than normal, and you know, it's one of those things where, you know, once that film comes back, there's just such an excitement to it that it's something that you don't get when you shoot digitally. And I think that's kind of one of the satisfactions about shooting on film. It's like you're working really hard and, you know, you're not exactly seeing what you're getting, but the get is so much better at the end. You know, the surprise when you see the footage, it was always, I remember when Sid sent me some of the stills from the film, I was just like, oh, thank God. Oh, it's great. You know, so it's like one of those things where, you know, you have to be a little more maybe on your toes on the day because, you know, you're shooting something that you're not necessarily seeing what it is, but the get is so great. And, you know, there's always little lessons. Whenever I watch something that I shot, there's always something where, you know, I'm like, oh, you know, I wish I had, you know, been a little more subtle here. I wish I had done this there. But all in all, it was a great experience. And, you know, it's something I was really happy that we got to shoot on film because I think it helped elevate the project. And it was, you know, this was one where, you know, like Sid had talked about, we would have had way more difficulty shooting this one digitally because of, you know, the skin tone variation, the highlight, you know, rendition. So yeah, overall it was a great experience. You know, I think you just have to flow with the situation a lot. You know, sometimes you're running out of light and this and that, but you just always have to kind of, you know, be as willing to be as malleable and adjustable as possible on the day. And, you know, that's I think, always the lesson that I learn every time I do a project is you always just have to be willing to go with the flow. Keep the vision in mind, but go with the flow. Yeah, it was a great experience.
Very good advice. And also thank you for elevating, I mean, film elevated, you're saying film elevated the quality work.
Yeah.
We just make the plane of the image. You guys put the images on it. So
yeah.
thank you for elevating the film. So with that, what I'd like to do is, does anyone, and the other thing is Siddharth sent out a link for the film, and I think those who are on the call that you saw that, so you can actually go online and you can watch it. Are there any questions from any of our participants, either by, let me see, if there are any chats, or either by voice or if you want to send it through chat. Any questions to either Siddharth or Daniel? I think that, I guess that we basically covered everything. And again, Siddharth, you're driving from North Carolina. I appreciate you coming in on a Saturday morning and while you're coming off of vacation, and that your girlfriend is driving. And thank you for staying with us and willing to take part. And Daniel, thank you again for coming in Saturday morning to talk about your experience. And Emma, who gets up an hour early because she's at the Sidewalk Film Festival. Thank you for organizing this once again. And those who are on the call, I appreciate you coming in. We'll let you know about next month. Don't forget, the Atlanta Film Festival starts in September. And also, don't forget, if you want to watch the 100-foot film contest participants, you go to the Atlanta Film Festival and you can click on the site and you can watch. So thank you all. Again, Daniel, Siddharth, thank you very much. Safe travels. Everybody be well.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thanks for having us. if anybody does decide they have any questions or want to reach out after checking out the movie or the trailer, I put my email there. So feel free to reach out with anything. Thank you so much for having us, Michael.
Okay, pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Have a good rest of the day.
Bye, guys.
You see